This is a video that I'm really not looking forward to making. I've been procrastinating on it for quite a while now, and I did not enjoy getting the gameplay for the background footage whatsoever. We're going to touch on that a little bit, but I figured that since the radar and missile buff just happened, the F-14 being pretty much the most popular jet in the game, it's only appropriate to cover it and go over how the new changes have impacted the F-14, if at all. And I'm going to tell you right now the answer to that is pretty much yes, but actually no. If you guys have watched my video in the past on the F-14 in current top tier meta or something like that, most of you probably have, and a lot of you really didn't like that video, which is fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion on that, but my opinion is pretty much the same as that video, except a little bit different. So I'm going to throw the card up here in the top right in case you haven't watched that. You can go ahead and do that if you want, but moving into this video, well, let's go over what the buff was first. Really, every missile in the game pulls a lot harder now, or at least initially. You know, it has more instantaneous turn than they used to in the past, and radars just overall have a better relationship with the missiles now as far as locking, tracking, all that type of thing. It's harder to notch than it was on many of the radars, which in my opinion is a good thing. I definitely think that the future of top tier War Thunder is going to be, of course, with the radar and radar missiles, and I think that them being stronger is nothing harmful to top tier as long as it's well executed. And I think the only thing that would make it better is having smaller players or smaller player matches, if that makes sense. So right now, what do we have? 12 versus 12 maybe, or 16 versus 16. I don't really remember, one or the other. And I just think that's too many players per team. I'd like to see probably 8 versus 8 for top tier matches. I think that would be a lot less chaotic, and it kind of solves the issue of having 300 missiles in the air at one time and having a really hard time actually being able to attack anybody, because if you do attack anyone, you pretty much just set yourself up for getting attacked and dying while you're not paying attention, and there's nothing you can really do about that. If you want to be defensive the entire game, you really don't have much of a say in whether or not your team wins or loses, and if you're going to be super aggro all game and trying to get as many kills as possible, you're just inevitably going to die. There's really no in between there in top tier. You can try to balance it, and the better players at top tier do balance it at least as well as they can, but you just can never do it perfectly, and you're never going to be able to do it perfectly. So overall, yeah, I think that the missile buff and the radar buffs was absolutely a positive change all across the board. However, I just wish there were a couple tweaks to the game mode itself that would help make these changes, what's the word? Just feel like the game runs smoother and more competitive in a sense. So let's talk about this and how it relates to the F-14A. Well, the F-14 has a very wide arsenal of air-to-air missiles. You guys probably all know this. You have the AIM-72, the AIM-54A Phoenix, the AIM-7F, and the AIM-9H, as well as the AIM-9G missiles. The AIM-54A is actually somewhat usable now. I wouldn't say it's completely useless like it was in the past, where, you know, before this change, if you were getting AIM-54A kills, more than likely your target was just tabbed out or something, or it had absolutely no idea what they were doing because that missile is just absolutely abysmal. But now it does kind of pull a little bit. It can be a little bit more tricky to dodge, and I wouldn't say that they're completely useless. If you want to take one or two out just for fun, then go ahead. But I will say that the Sparrow is definitely still the more competitive missile. As far as the Tomcat goes, you should take as many Sparrows as possible. I'm not telling you to take as many Sparrows as possible. I'm just saying that I think if you're trying to be as competitive as you possibly can in the F-14, the Sparrow is definitely going to be your best bet. And while I wouldn't necessarily call the F-14's loadout particularly meta, compared to other planes at top tier, it's pretty good, better than most, and the planes that have almost identical loadouts, well, it just has more missiles than they do. So far, so good for the F-14. Everything is looking good. It probably should be noticeably better in a very, very strong plane at top tier, right? Well, it is a pretty strong plane at top tier, but it is simultaneously not strong at top tier, and that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, I know, so bear with me as I try to explain this. Yeah, the loadout is good. Compared to other planes, it's up there as far as the better end of loadouts at top tier, but in the end of the day, they're still SAR missiles, and while the radar and the missiles have been buffed, and they have been buffed considerably, you will get more radar missile kills now than you would have before, Radar missiles all suffer from the same two very large flaws. The first flaw being that anybody can dodge your missile at any point simply by turning their plane 90 degrees to you, and there's nothing you can do about that. The second flaw, which is probably the much bigger problem, is the fact that if you're using a radar missile, you have a target locked on your radar. Your radar has a gimbal limit of about 60 degrees typically left or right, so in total you have like a 120 degree cone on most aircraft's radar as far as where you can point your nose in relation to your target. And so what that means is you kind of just have to fly towards any target you're shooting at until your missile hits there, or else of course it's going to lose track and you're not going to be getting a kill. And this takes anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds, maybe even longer, depending on how far away you're launching it from, though you really shouldn't launch them super far away. Of course it can work, but I just wouldn't recommend it. And so, point being, you do have to spend a considerable amount of time basically tunnel visioning in on one target, even if you're keeping situational awareness and looking around as you guide that missile in. There's nothing you can do about it. You're going to be tunnel vision either way, just in the sense that you're flying right at that enemy and you're not able to easily adjust and adapt to what's going on around you. You may be aware of what's going on around you, but you're not going to be in a position to actually do something about it if you're going to continue guiding that missile in. And let's say you launch 4 or 5 Sparrows in any given game, and we're just going to go ahead and say that the average Sparrow launch is 8 seconds. If you launch 5 Sparrows, you're spending 40 seconds of your match, typically early game, just flying straight toward your target and hoping that they don't evade it as you watch that missile hopefully impact their plane, but also it might just completely miss, or they evade it, or whatever it may be. And when top tier matches, pretty much everybody knows this, the biggest thing about winning top tier games is that early game impact potential. If you can make big plays happen very quickly, get the numbers advantage happening for your side very quickly, you're going to win the game. And this lasts about 120 seconds, basically 2 minutes. The game is decided in the very first 2 minutes of combat. And if you're spending 40 seconds of that 2 minutes just guiding missiles in on one target the entire time and not being able to freely move around the battlefield and adjust to what's going on around you, help teammates out when they need it, find somebody else that isn't looking, you're not going to be having a very large impact on the game for your team. And I think this is where one of the big roadblocks is of top tier right now, is most of the planes, like I said, have a loadout like the F-14, where it's mostly SAR reliant and you have a couple of mediocre heat seekers to back it up. And this pretty much just leads to stalemate style gameplay until somebody, or at least a handful of players, make pretty big moves in rapid succession to quite quickly turn the tide of the match for one team or the other. Very often this isn't necessarily players making big plays, but rather players making critical mistakes, and it results in them dying very rapidly. How often have you been in a match where your teammate just kind of, or your team rather, just kind of suddenly falls apart all around you, and next thing you know, you're the last one alive versus the entire enemy top tier team? This happens pretty often, and I think most of you can more or less relate to that. It actually happened in that opening clip, or somewhat opening clip, around the 3-minute mark of my video, where I had teammates 1 minute and then the next minute they were just all gone. And this is because how important that early game is, and how important it is to be able to move around the map at will and launch at multiple targets in rapid succession. And a SAR missile is just not going to let you do that. And here comes the argument for the Phoenix. Fox 3, active radar homing, shoot all 6 of them in RTB. Yeah, shut up, don't do that. Oh, and before I forget, as the video is ending here, kind of, one of the other really big problems with the F-14 that I had mentioned when it was kind of first coming out onto the live game is that its engines are extremely hot, and you're going to have a very hard time flaring anything in this jet. And so if somebody gets on your 6 with a rather flare resistant missile, you can just go back to the hangar because you are not going to be dodging. I think that's pretty bad backdoor balancing for the F-14, but it's going to have some flaws, I guess, because the flight performance is still leaps and bounds above everything else in the game. This is not how I'd want to see the F-14 balance, but it's not going to be changing anytime soon, so you may as well get used to it. I guess in summary, the best missiles in the game, in my opinion, are still the really strong IR missiles. While most planes do have a loadout similar to the F-14, It's just not the one I would prefer. Hopefully that covers the F-14 for a while, and I'll see ya.